Hi, welcome back to the podcast where today I'm delighted to be joined by Anne Buckley, also known as KAB in an artistic moniker type sense. So, hello, Kelly, and thank you for
Hello,
coming on.
nice to meet you.
Yeah,
After
you
messages.
too. Yeah. So you caught my attention because you were doing doing a project with Graham Burnett, who I've also done a podcast interview with in the past and known for many years. And basically you were recording nature, and that's an area of interest of mine, so I'm sure we can come on to that. But where I always start is by asking people about their upbringing, and with particular reference to what kind of, maybe, stuff that might have happened in your upbringing that led you to this situation of working with Graham and doing the nature recording as well. So yeah, over to you.
Okay. Well, I suppose firstly, I was always really into writing and songwriting since I've been really, really little. I was born in Islington and kind of brought up between there and South East London. Me and my mum moved to South East London, a place called Thamesmead. But I was always going back to my nan and granddad's at the weekends, which in Islington, and my aunt and so forth. And then my mum remarried when I was around about 9, and we moved to kind of East London, Essexy parts, which is like Romford. Okay. And that's sort of, well, it's Chadwell Heath actually is where it was. And still spent a lot of time at my nan's, going back to my nan's in Islington. So that's where I grew up. And when I was really little, I used to spend a lot of time at my nan and granddad's, and I was always writing. My granddad actually taught me to write before I went to school, my mum says. And I just loved writing, and I used to just write, but also make up songs from a really young age, and melodies. And I was, I did dancing as well. And, I think I used to be probably a bit of a annoying child. I used to watch me do a show, and I'd make, do these shows in front of them, and always singing and stuff that my granddad used to record. There's all these little recordings. I don't know who's got them anymore, if they even exist, but my granddad used to record me singing. So I was always kind of into music and writing in that way. And then I suppose as I got older, I mean, it just never left me. And I started playing guitar from about the age of about 6 up until about 16. I had lessons, although you wouldn't believe it because I'm absolutely terrible. But it was really the creation. It was really the songwriting that I loved. And then I also, I suppose, if you wanted to talk about the nature stuff, I suppose something that came in to my life was my granddad actually got me interested. This is going to sound so weird. My granddad got me interested in witchcraft. My granddad was not to say he got me practicing it or anything, but it was just a conversation. I don't know, I was probably doing something at school, like a project or something, and my granddad was one of these people that he was self-educated and very well read, and if whatever you used to want to talk about, he'd go, "Oh, I've got a book on that," and he'd bring this book down from upstairs. And so that's kind of, that conversation went on to this witchcraft stuff, and it really sparked an interest in me, like this kind of idea of paganism and these sabbats, and learning about nature and how it used to be, like the ancient kind of sabbats or festivals, and how they became modern day, like Yule and so forth. And I suppose that was like an initial spark of being interested in nature and the seasons, and just this kind of idea of sort of natural science or natural magic, if you want to put it like that, just kind of this idea of that existing, like energies and so forth. So I don't know, that sort of, I suppose, sparked an interest at an early age, and it's just always stayed with me. Just find it very interesting. And so I just kind of grew up and carried on music, became a journalist. My mum and dad were very they were kind of like always encouraged me and my sisters to aim high, sort of do well, but I suppose the encouragement for me was more to go the journalistic route, because I think with music, my mum and dad sort of just saw it as, well, not many people make it. And so they felt like it was safer. So I did end up going down the journalistic route, but then ended up sort of having carried on songwriting and being in bands and all that as we do. And then I got to a point where I just decided to go solo. Just because you know what it's like to be in bands with people. There's so many logistics, and when we're older and in bands, everyone's got lives and jobs and all that kind of thing. So it was just really a sense of it being easier. I got really interested in wanting to get into music licensing and creating soundtracks and all that kind of thing. And so started up a solo project. And in order to become like a solo artist, I sort of needed to have my band existing in the form of electronics, because I'm not very good at playing any one particular instrument. So it's all right recording, because you can go back and do it again. But to sort of play live is a whole other thing. So I started to learn about music production and just got kind of more involved in that. And actually what actually happened to start that is I was in a band with some people called Figurehead, and this guy, a friend of mine, a really good friend of mine called Luke, he used to do all the beats, and I was just singing in it, and he couldn't make a gig that we had, and it was a paid gig. And it was what it's like, it's quite hard to even get paid for a gig these days. So myself and my other band mate, Louise, wanted to still do it. So I kind of took over on this sort of launch pad. And that was my first sort of go at kind of really, getting to grips with it. And it was really from doing that I thought, well, because I was just starting off using, royalty-free loops just to kind of form sort of, some drum beats and that kind of thing, and just kind of remixing them up a bit. But I thought, well, I don't really want to. It felt like cheating, so I thought I want to learn how to create my own stuff, and that's when I then sort of got into music production, and then I joined Music Production for Women, which is this amazing group. It's kind of worldwide now. It's there's a lot of members from all over the world, and did this course, learned how to use Ableton, and then did another course and another course and another course in mixing and all this kind of different stuff. So just really learned a lot over, I don't know, a couple of years or whatever. And then from doing that and making my own beats, obviously you'd start then creating your own samples. And then I always wanted to kind of, make samples out of field recording, found sounds and anything, stuff around the house or whatever. But particularly I was interested in going out in nature and recording outside. And then also somewhere along the line, I'd sort of become interested in seeing these people that were plugging in to or flowers. That became a thing, a few, I don't know how many years back, a number of years back now, where people were attaching to flowers, certain musicians, and they're getting the frequencies. And I thought, well, that's amazing. So I wanted to, sorry, you can hear my son up there.
I can't actually. So
okay, that's good. So yeah, I just sort of started to become interested in that and researching how that worked and what I could get hold of in terms of the equipment. And so yeah, I just then started to become really interested in that. And then I suppose that point of being really interested in kind of this idea of nature being this sort of energy, and that early kind of interest that I had in that idea really was fascinating to me. So the idea that, you know, I was plugging into whatever, anything that was conductive, whether it was the sea or whether it was, you know, plants or mushrooms, or in the case of what you saw on Graham's film was the rotting apples and all the stuff, you know, various things over at the orchard. It just, that kind of idea that their frequencies, it makes you, and what, you know, you're feeding them, they're attached to the MIDI controller, which you've got attached to a synthesizer. So you are hearing, it's like a way of hearing the energy, hearing the frequency of the whatever it is you're attached to, whatever conductive thing it is that you're attached to. And I suppose it's just endlessly fascinating to me to feel connected. It kind of, as a human being, it makes you really feel part of something much bigger. Not to want to sound too
No, absolutely. Yeah, well, that's the sort of profound nature of it, I would suggest. Just sort of rewinding a bit then, 'cause we went through quite a bit there, I would say.
Yeah.
What kind of music were you doing then in the first place when you were doing
You mean
bands?
when I was in bands?
Yeah.
We were different kinds of bands, actually. So some were kind of I suppose what you'd call them kind of indie pop, and then it went on to sort of bands with an electronic, definitely with an electronic sort of undercurrent. So we would have maybe live bands. So I don't know, for instance, the band that I was talking about, the most recent one, I was singing, and then there was a guy that was doing the beats, that was Luke. Another guy, Dave, he was playing guitar, and then Louise, she was playing flute, bit of cigar box guitar, bass, and she was looping it. So she would be looping it, and it kind of gradually, this band sort of went down to just being us two in the end, just because of, you know, the others not being able to make it and so forth. And then I went on to doing the electronic parts and singing while she was doing all this music and looping. And yeah, it was so I suppose it's, the electronica has always kind of been there. I like Massive Attack and those kinds of bands. But yeah, I mean, I've been in different sorts of bands, other bands that there's been no electronica, but there's still probably been that vibe. That sort of,
It sounds quite experimental. Is that,
yeah.
am I right?
Yeah. I wouldn't, probably the bands were not so much. I mean, maybe a bit, but I'd say probably I've gone on to do that a lot more in my own.
Right, yeah, that's the bit you've developed.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Ah, that's interesting. What kind of journalism did you do as well, or do you do?
Well, I've been doing it for like 28 years, so it's been all kinds. I started off as a news journalist, and did all that, you know, death knocks and all those horrible things. I was a crime reporter for quite a while, and then I went on to doing feature writing, which I kind of really preferred. And then I sort of ended up kind of going mainly into sort of music and arts field. So I probably stayed in that for most of the time that I was in journalism, I would say. But I've done a bit of probably everything. I mean, commercial features even, and sub-editing and editing, and, you know, a bit of all of it, really. But yeah, I'd say mainly it's been kind of music and arts features writing.
Crime reporting is the one I really picked up on there, because that just sounds, it's probably one of these things that sounds brilliant, but it's probably not quite as, I don't know if glamorous is even an appropriate word, but did you do any juicy stuff on that?
Yeah, loads. At the time I was working on the Romford Recorder, so it was a fairly high crime area, I'd say, at the time.
Yeah, that's very generous of Romford for you.
Yeah. So I mean, it was great in the way that obviously you would get really good stories when you know, they're kind of handed to you on a plate, really, doing the crime, being the crime reporter. And I did have a really good relationship actually with the police. So you'd go and do your police calls, and, you know, they'd give you stuff. And some of the best stuff actually was off the record, which I did keep off the record because I'm a nice journalist and I value that when people trust you. But yeah, and then great stuff would come out of that, because then you build this trust. So I mean, God, there was so many things. I'm trying to think. One in particular, which was really quite horrible actually, was this. Should I talk about it? I don't know.
If you want, yeah. It's up to you. Only if you feel comfortable.
Yeah, I suppose so. It was when he was all over the nationals and everything. So, it was this really sad story of this guy that had come out of his house and found a plastic bag, and this baby had been abandoned in it, and down this sort of alleyway, kind of around the back of his drive, kind of thing. And yeah, that's just one that always sticks with me, because obviously, I'm a mother as well, and it's just very sad. And this, the baby had been the baby was had died, and it was just a really, really sad story. I don't know why that one always sort of sticks with me, really. But yeah, I mean, God, there were so many, obviously, like stabbings and God knows. But I feel like I'm I used to get quite invested, I suppose, and I used to just get really sad about all these stories. So, I mean, there was one I remember. This young boy had been killed at this kind of notorious spot on a road, and I went down and sort of sat with, because I mean, you used to have to go and do death knocks. You know what I mean by that, when you have to knock on the door of the family, and it was awful. You'd walk around the block 10 times before thinking, oh God. And then I was so fortunate that no one, it was horrible to me. I think they probably felt sorry for me. I was like, I'm so sorry. But I did this, and I went over and sat with these friends of his that were holding this vigil, and I was just sobbing. And I thought, I don't think I want to be a reporter anymore. And I spoke to my news editor, and I said, I just want to do features. I just want to, I don't want to do crime anymore. And he was great and said, yeah, great, you can do features. So they switched me around, and I didn't do any more crime reporting.
Yeah, one of the things, I mean, you've kind of answered it already to an extent, I think, but I was going to say, how much does that kind of stuff affect you? Because you are seeing the kind of the rotten end of human behavior, I suppose, quite a lot of the time. And it must be quite difficult. And then I suppose nature is the other side of that, isn't it? I guess it's the opposite almost, perhaps, to be around nature and so on.
Yeah.
And this is what really kind of interested me, like I say, when I saw what you were up to, because I'm really interested in frequencies. I mean, obviously, anybody who's ever tuned a guitar knows what a frequency is, and I'm really interested in the way frequencies can interact with the brain and all that kind of stuff. And obviously, you can look at that from a musical point of view, but you can also look at it from a nature point of view, where I'm sure I've read that, if you spend a couple of hours in nature, your personal frequency actually changes for the better. And that's why people go for long walks in nature and feel better afterwards, essentially. So you got into recording nature. Had you just seen other people do that then? Is that how you became aware of it?
Yeah, I mean, I'd seen it kind of, it started to, I don't know, just sort of come into focus. I suppose, I don't know, probably a lot of stuff you look at online, once your algorithms know that you're looking at taking an interest in something, then you get kind of thrown loads of it, don't you? So it kept coming up, and I'd just sort of see, different people doing it. As I say, it was kind of mainly the flower thing, a bit attaching to flowers. And it was more this idea of, well, how, what do you mean? Because there was all this kind of stuff in the press at the time saying, that you're listening to the music of flowers. What do you mean, the music of flowers? So obviously it's not, it kind of is the music of flowers, but what you're hearing a synthesizer, you're not hearing the flower. It's like you're able to hear the frequencies through the synthesizer. And it was just kind of learning about how it worked a bit. I thought, well, God, it must work with all kinds of things then. And and I just became more and more interested in it. And just, I suppose, I can be a bit of a geek. If I get interested in something, I really read and read and read about it, or maybe it's the journalist in me, I don't know, the researcher. But so I started to get really interested in all kinds of things like bioacoustics and soundscape ecology and all that, just everything really around it. I started to get really interested in sound in a much wider way, rather than just, making music or creating noises that sound great to exist in a track. I started to think about it in a wider way, and I suppose that's sort of why I kind of started to get more involved in doing what you might call art projects or sound art projects connected to those things, that kind of wider idea of sound and frequencies or the soundscape ecology or whatever. Sorry, I can't even remember what you asked me now. Was it
well, okay, so
I'll ramble off on one.
Yeah, well, we're talking about, obviously we're talking about recording flowers, say, yeah. So how do you record a flower? What's the actual? I mean, you don't just hold a microphone next to it.
No, so you would attach kind of, I suppose, electrodes is what you'd call them, to the flower, or you can like attach them with these kind of, sort of sticky things, or you can plug into it if it's maybe at the root or something like that, or you can attach these electrodes to the leaves if they're, strong enough to take the weight of the electrodes or whatever. So you connect those to it, and so the energy that then comes from it, from the flower or whatever it is that you're connecting to, then goes into a MIDI controller, and then you've got that attached to a synthesizer. So it's the frequency of that's creating the notes, the musical the notes, the MIDI notes that are then going into the synth. So you're hearing it kind of or whatever, depending on what it is. I mean, if you plug into the earth, it's kind of just tends to be like a flat. It's always quite a flat sort of sound. If you plug into, different things create different results. Of the sea is amazing, obviously, because that's incredibly conductive, seawater, and you've got the motion of the waves and everything, and so that's kind of like you've got, I don't know, just different things. It's always like a real thrill for me when you sort of think, oh, how will this sound, and then you kind of attach, and then you get, something that's quite lively or not. I mean, actually Graham's project that I think was the one you must have looked at, the orchard. There was like this tree, and it was like quite ancient. It was all decomposing and sort of falling apart. It still did bear fruit, but it was kind of, this tree was rotting really in parts. And Graham said, oh, what about trying this? And I thought, I don't think it's going to work, because it's like wood's not particularly conductive anyway, and I just don't, well, it isn't conductive, and I just thought, I don't know if this is going to work, because it's kind of this rotting, this tree is kind of looks like, I don't know, it just looks almost dead.
Yeah.
But it did. I sort of plugged into this sort of part of it, and it was just really quite lively, which fascinated me. Because
it's almost a form of communication, isn't it? Which is
really
the potential, and it's also a very new thing, I would say, in the great scheme of stuff that we discover. So what really fascinates me is the idea that, eventually you could end up talking to flowers, or having some kind of communication, or at least understanding their communication.
yeah.
And that would be pretty mind-blowing stuff. So on that level, do you sort of find it a spiritual experience, or is it very much scientific?
No, I guess it is spiritual, really, because I mean, probably in the sense of just feeling connected, and as you were just talking about a minute.
Oh, sorry, that's my smoke alarm. Yeah, go on,
Oh,
yeah.
okay.
They test it, I should say. There isn't a fire or anything, but yeah.
All right. Okay, good. Yeah, it's I suppose you were saying a minute ago about going, when you just getting out in nature makes you feel sort of better, and I suppose I mean, I actually, a newspaper I was working on, I gave him my notice in December. The reason being is I just started, I was kind of working for myself doing this kind of stuff, all the music and sound stuff and sound art stuff as a business, and doing sound for and music for media. And then I was doing the journalism as well. And you know what it's like working on a newspaper, it's intense, you know, it's a lot. So I would often I'd started to become more and more sort of, I don't know, just got run out of steam with that kind of maintaining that high newspaper output where you just have to churn out story after story after story all day long. And so it became even more valuable to me, I suppose, to go out and then just have that sort of time. It was like magic, really, that you would just think, oh God, you know, just oh God, there's just something bigger, and just it. So yeah, in that sense, it was spiritual, I suppose, or is as well as scientific, because there is that science of, you know, connecting with those frequencies that are grounding, and you know they are. Yeah, it is. I suppose it's a mixture of both, really.
I think perhaps it's worth trying to get a bit of clarity on what actually this energy is. Because I would imagine, I don't know, I'm guessing here, but I would imagine that in history, I mean, in a way, if you go back long enough, I'd imagine people were quite animistic in thinking everything has a sort of soul, even perhaps. But then I think you definitely go through a period in history where people just think there's nothing there, and you know, would look at a flower and just think it's just a flower and there is nothing there, and wouldn't have any idea that there could be any energy. So what is this energy that you're recording?
Oh, I mean, it does have energy, and I suppose, yeah, that's really interesting, and it's kind of what I was talking about earlier of this ancient kind of wisdom that people had. I mean, I think, you know, that sort of whole pagan life or whatever, this, you know, people knew so much more, I think, back then. That's kind of, you know, what you would assume from reading about how people lived back then and how connected with nature they were, and what they knew, their understanding about plants and their properties and all kinds of things. And you know, even not necessarily about plants, but you know, astrology, and you know, I just think people knew so much more about nature. And yes, I would say, yeah, that we did then go through a period of just, it's almost like, what do we want trees for, you know? And you know, just not being connected to that kind of thing. So but I feel like it's coming back. I feel that people really want to feel that. And I'd say, you know, this energy, what it is, I mean, it's energy that exists in any kind of living organic thing. There are frequencies running through everything. So and that's really what it is. That's what you're connecting to. So I mean, I don't know why it's so fascinating to me, because obviously you know that a plant is alive. So I don't know why that's just not enough, but I suppose it's almost the proof, the proof of the frequency, because you're hearing it. It's something that you can't see. When people talk about energies or whatever, you know, you can't see them. It's like, what's in, you know, is it mumbo jumbo? But it isn't. You know, the energy between people is real. It exists. And I suppose when you are connecting, you can also connect to people, by the way, and do it that way, and get sounds that way. So it's almost just proof of it, I suppose.
Well, we connect to people, get sounds all the time in hospitals, don't we? For instance, you know, and doctors checking your heartbeat and all that kind of thing, which is just a frequency, I suppose. Yeah. So if do all different flowers, say, do they all have different frequencies to each other?
It's I always find it quite interesting when you plug into different things and they'll give off a different you know, just a different kind of pattern or whatever. Again, just to use Graham's thing as an example, you know, I can't remember how many things. There was quite a few, like the rotting apples, the tree. There was a hazel tree that we attached to the little flowers on that, and daffodils that were springing up. The daffodils were really lively. So yeah, and everything was different. You know, nothing you didn't plug into one thing that, oh, that kind of just the same. Yeah, everything was very different no matter what you plugged into. Even like rotting apple to rotting apple. You know, there was a whole.
That was going to be my next question. Do two daffodils, can they have different frequencies to each other as well, or do they? Yeah.
Yeah.
So you could start looking at them more as individuals, I suppose, rather than just kind of a sort of a grey mass of 100 daffodils or whatever. You would perhaps then start to think of them more as their own individual entities.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, actually, when I was recording it over there with Graham, I was creating loops. So I was doing a loop of just plugged into, say, the rotten apple, and recording that, and then I would let that loop carry on, and then I'd plug into something else and give it a bass sound, say, and then that would be throwing up a different melody, if you want to call it a melody. It's not necessarily sounds very melodic, so obviously it's a bit all over the place, and then plugging into something else and choosing a different sound. So it's almost like you had a little band
Right.
that
Yeah.
created this music, conducted these notes. I did it with ice as well. I always laugh because I feel a bit silly sometimes when I talk about it, but I did a project for a commission for the Focal Point Gallery. I don't know if you've heard of Focal Point. Quite a big gallery that's based in Southend. It's great, by the way. So if you're ever around here, you should go and have a look at it. But I did a commission for them, and it was called FPG Sounds. I had this sort of whole initiative, and they asked if I would do something, which was obviously a huge honour. And so I created this project based on lost soundscapes. And part of that, I wanted to record ice. And so I put a hydrophone into a block of ice. I would love to have gone to actual real glaciers, but, couldn't really afford to do that. So I plugged into this real block of ice and just recorded that melting, but also had plugged into the water to get the MIDI notes as well. So it's it works in with all kinds of different conductive things. And then that whole piece, I created an entire composition, but it was all conducted by the ice. I didn't arrange. I didn't add any of the notes to make it sound better or anything. I just left it exactly what it was.
So if you get a block of ice and you're recording it and it melts into water, does that change the frequency?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I was recording as well the sound of melting ice, because that I don't know if you've ever heard ice melt, but
No, I haven't. No. Funnily enough.
It gives a really eerie, like really beautiful, haunting sound. So I stuck a hydrophone in it. My kids thought because I had this block of ice with a hydrophone in it, and I was just standing around filming it as well as recording it. And my kids came walking in from outside, and I was, shh, and I just stand there. They were like, trying not to laugh. Like, what is she doing now? She's just standing there for hours recording this block of ice, because every now and then it would go where it would melt, and you'd get
Does stuff sound like you expect? Like, you're saying, have you ever heard ice melt? Immediately I think Cocteau Twins for some reason. I think of ethereal type sound, whereas with wood I would expect a different kind of vibe, so to speak. So is it anything like that, or is it completely different? Is it expectations?
I mean, when you're plugging in and getting the frequencies?
Yeah. Does it sound like it looks?
Well, in the case of the ice, I mean, that was the actual sound, because I had a hydrophone stuck inside it, so recording the actual sound of what ice actually sounds like, that you could hear with your ears.
Right.
If you were in sort of, some places, up in the northern sort of part of the world, you can hear. There's actually a really great video of someone called, her name's Jonna Yinton. She's Swedish, and she's got this video of her listening to like these iced lakes with these sounds, and it's they sound like whales. Actually, that's what it sounds like. So that in that case, I guess it almost is maybe what you might expect, the sort of sound of ice melting. But when you're plugging into things, obviously what you're hearing is the synth. So you're not, it's not necessarily what, if you're plugging into that flower or whatever it might be, whatever sound it makes, the actual sound is whatever you're choosing in terms of the synth. So in that way, it's not going to sound what you expect because you're choosing it. But in terms of the patterns, the frequencies that it's making, I suppose sometimes, because I don't know, like the dandelions, for example, plugging into those, I did expect those to be quite lively because they were, they were kind of springing up and they were new and they were, just sort of peeking out from the earth. So you kind of think, you'd expect them to be kind of really full of energy, and they were. You can hear that they were, but you've chosen the sound.
I get you. Yeah.
Yeah.
And which again leads me on to everything keeps leading me on to things there. So the different parts of a life cycle would have different frequencies as well, would they? So a brand new dandelion would have a different frequency to a dying dandelion.
Well, you would think so, wouldn't you? But I mean, as I say, when I plugged into that tree that was decomposing and it was just kind of, really on its last legs, and I thought, I don't really think we're going to get much from this, but it did. It had, there was a lot of sort of energy going on there, which I felt was great, especially, like getting older. Still alive,
Right? Yeah.
Not dead yet. So sometimes it's unexpected.
Yes. Yeah. Is there any musicality or anything you would recognize as a musician as maybe not even musicality in terms of notes, but perhaps in terms of beats or loops or anything like that? I mean, when you listen to the birds singing, obviously they're not singing do, re, mi or whatever, but they are making agreeable noises quite a lot of the time. Yeah. Is some stuff more agreeable in terms of what you're getting off it? It's a difficult question to actually word that. I hope you know what I mean.
If you mean, do you mean just sort of field recording, or do you mean actually again this frequency thing?
Well, either really. I'm just sort of wondering if you're hearing any musicality in nature, I suppose.
I mean, I hear a lot of musicality in nature. I mean, I've got sort of tracks that I've created just from, recording just nature itself, just the sounds of nature. And like I quite like binaural recording as well, where you can hear.
Okay, yeah.
I've got like just one track I'm just thinking of where I just went into the woods and recorded nature, just kind of like what's going on around, and then took parts of that and sampled that, so it kind of became some sort of arrangement. I mean, it's still quite experimental, but there is sort of and a lot of it as well, I turned the sounds. So say, for instance, there would have been a bird in it, as you just described, and then turn those the bird sounds into MIDI notes, and then added another instrument. So there's certainly so much musicality and melody in nature, whether when you're going out and just recording it. And I suppose in terms of the plugging in stuff, sometimes it seems to be quite sweet and melodic, and then other times it's kind of and very kind of experimental sort of noise, what you might call noise, that kind of like frequency sort of sound. Again, it depends what sound you're using as well. That's going to make a difference. But often when you're plugged in something, it's it's kind of a bit, it's just sort of a bit all over the place because it's just, you know, generating these notes. But I mean, the ice was very melodic, actually. That was a very melodic sound. Yeah.
I guess that is congruent with what I would presume from things like how beautiful ice crystals can be and all that kind of stuff. I guess it's all quite pleasing stuff, I suppose, isn't it?
Yeah.
Do you think flowers can have moods then? Do you think you could plug into a daffodil one day and it could be in a better mood than another day?
To try and see. I reckon, well, I mean, this is, God, I wish I'm terrible at remembering names. Well, I am these days. I think it's perimenopausal. There's I wish I could remember her name. I'll have to tell you. I'll have to find it afterwards in case anyone's heard of this amazing woman who does this kind of sound science stuff, and she's been doing all these kinds of experiments where she will get a little plant and test its sound waves and do all these kind of environmental tests on it to see how it responds in terms of what frequency it's giving off, you know, in a sound sense, and also how it reacts with growth and this kind of thing. And I mean, she does all these experiments because it really is about testing how nature is responding to the environment.
Environment, yes, absolutely, yeah.
So interesting. I'll have to get her name and give it to you so you can add it to the.
Yeah, I can put it underneath the video or whatever. Yeah, this is really interesting, and I think this is the future as well. Really, I'm quite interested in something called epigenetics, which is all about how our genes respond to environment. And again, same sort of thing, which is absolutely not the accepted wisdom. And I think perhaps there's a lot to learn from what you're doing in terms of, you know, how nature actually works. I think it's a whole new other window on stuff potentially. Do you think, is this your job now then? Is this what you actually do for a living?
Yeah, I've started to do it full time since December. I went full time, self-employed, and yes, it's now my job. Touch wood, it's going all right. So yeah, still quite.
How I've got to ask on just a basic economic level, how on earth does that work? As we touched on before, music's not very easy way to make a living. Recording flowers strikes me as possibly even more so. But I mean, yeah, who pays you?
Well, it's you know, it's different ways. So excuse me, my nose is running a bit because I'm just getting over this cold. I'm just going to
Oh God.
grab a tissue quickly.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, no worries at all.
God, yeah, sorry, to answer your question, yeah, it's all different really. So I do, obviously I do music in a you know, a normal sense, if you want to use that word. So I do create soundtracks and for different types of media. So for instance, I'm working at the moment on a soundscape for an artist who's going to be doing an exhibition in London, and a lot of her stuff is about ASMR, or some of the exhibition is. But I'm doing a soundscape so people will be wearing headphones for part of the installations. But she wants a soundscape for, you know, when people are actually walking around it with no headphones. So I'm doing that. There's you know, I've done stuff for different kinds of things, like such as films and adverts and all that kind of thing, where, you know, I've kind of created the music or sound design as well, do quite a bit of. So there's you know, that's obviously you get paid to do that. Also commissions for art projects, so that, you know, you get paid to do different art projects. So for instance, the one I just was speaking about, which was the focal point one. So it's all different really. It's in different ways. Yeah, I do.
It sounds a bit like living the dream, to be honest, Kelly. You know, I presume this is something you've wanted to do for a while, and
yeah, I have wanted to do it for a while. I started to get really interested, first of all, in soundtracks. Probably a number, you know, many years ago, really. Like, how does that work? And then I really became serious about it. I think it was sort of about, I don't know, somewhere around 2016, 17, 18. It's kind of hard to remember because it's been sort of, you know, creeping up for years. And I just sort of started to look at how licensing music worked, and, you know, how royalties worked and copyright and what you have to do, what you have to have in place and all that kind of stuff. And it was like a gradual learning. And then so yeah, I kind of had that aim. My main aim really back at that point was to license music, but then kind of through doing that and just kind of, you know, evolving in with everything else I was doing as well, all these kind of other experiments and, you know, everything we're talking about, and, you know, putting it on social media, kind of Instagram mainly. People then sort of realize what you're doing, and then, you know, they ask you to do stuff. So, you know, oh, I've got this, would you like to do the sound design for it, and so forth. So it's kind of, it's grown, and but it's still early days, so I don't want to, you know,
No, sure, yeah.
don't want to jinx it too much.
No, absolutely.
You know, I'm still, you know, probably keep my hand in writing. I'm doing a little bit of content just for someone, a bit of content and marketing just as well. That's only a little bit, 1 day a week, doing that for somebody who's like freelance. So you know, but I feel like a bit kind of with the writing at the moment, with the journalism, just because having done it so long. But I mean, I love writing, so I'm sure there'll be something that I want to write if I can think of, you know, if a feature comes to me that somebody might be interested in, I'd still keep my hand in doing that as well. So yes, a bit of a mixture of all of the things that I love to do.
Is the soundscaping and the nature recording, is there a Venn diagram there, or are they completely separate?
How do you mean? Are they?
I mean, do you use these nature frequency recordings in your soundscaping?
Yeah. Yes. Often, yeah, I use them within it. Yeah. So depending on what it is, I mean, obviously sometimes I'll just write music. I just did some music for a dance company that's created this software, this kind of studio thing. They work a lot with AI, art and body mapping and all this kind of stuff. And they created this software, and I've created I created 8 tracks, or they took 9 actually. They took one that I'd already written to be within this software. That was just, you know, straightforward, you know, me making music, you know, just in a normal sense, keys, and, you know, just writing music. And sometimes, you know, I'll just write normal songs, sometimes with lyrics. I don't sing so much these days. My son, sorry. I don't sing so much. I mean, not because I don't want to, just because I seem to just do a lot of instrumental stuff. It just seems to have sort of gone that way at the moment. So, but I do that as well. But then sometimes, yeah, I'll create these other pieces that are really, really, they have a lot of field recording in them. They have a lot of the notes that I've taken from the frequencies. So, for instance, the ice one, for example, that I was just talking about, that's a whole piece that was created just from the sounds of melting ice. Sounds really boring, but I like it. But it's created a nice piece. Or you know, I don't know, Graham's the thing for Graham's film, but that was entirely well, it's only 1 minute long actually, but it was entirely made from the frequencies of the orchard. There was no other added instrumentation. No, sorry, there was no other added composition, I should say. It's all conducted by nature. But, you know, I've done a number of those things actually. There's quite a lot of them I've done like that, where it's just all been the nature that's either conducted it, or it's been created from field recordings, or a mixture of both.
I was thinking about Bargain Hunt just then. bit of a bizarre tangent, but when they put stuff up for auction, and quite often they're saying that the story behind something can add to its value and so on. So the reason I was thinking about that was in connection to this is when you're doing a soundscape, for instance, for an art project or whatever, is the concept of the sound. Does that feed into it a lot in people? Does that add value to it? Not just the actual end product of the sound, but the concept of where it comes from and so on.
I hope so. Yeah. I mean, yeah, that's yeah. I mean, I'll talk about the focal point one again just because it's kind of in my mind. And I did. It was about, it was about soundscapes and soundscape ecology. So there were 5 parts to it, and it was kind of the idea. It was on. They asked me to do it just as this other show was closing that they had called Tip of the Iceberg. So it's a lot to do with responding to climate change in nature and how it responds and so forth. And I wanted to do something that was about lost soundscapes. So I started talking about Doggerland. Have you heard of? Do you know Doggerland?
It's an Essex thing, isn't it? Is that right?
No, it was in Mesolithic times. There was it was considered the heartland of Europe.
I'm completely on the wrong track then.
Now, obviously, it wasn't necessarily considered back then, but it was just this place, this lush kind of land that was connected to Britain, to Denmark. It was all connected, and then climate change back then and rising sea levels caused it to gradually flood, and then there was a tsunami that came from Denmark. And so there was this tsunami, and then that's how everything sank. So that's how Britain then became disconnected from the rest. But it's still under there. It's still under the North Sea, and it was discovered, I think, first of all, I think it was in the 20s from memory, first of all, and then since then they've discovered lots more about it from oil. What do you call them? Oil digging.
Explorations, yeah.
And so so I wanted to think about the soundscape that would have existed at that point, the soundscape ecology. And soundscape ecology is, if anything, so if you go out of your own home and you had your eyes shut, you'd probably know that if someone dropped you outside your own home, let's say, and you didn't know where you was, you'd been blindfolded, you would probably recognize that you're outside your own home because of the various, soundscape ecology. And you'd probably be able to tell what time of the day it was because, just things that you would recognize and just that kind of thing that exists. So it was about that. So I started off talking about that had been lost. And then the second part was, I think that might have been the ice melting. The third part was, so by 2050, I don't know if you've seen these maps, climatesurvey.org have put out these maps, and they show these parts of the world that will be underwater, are predicted to be underwater by 2050. Because Southend is a coastal town, or city it is now, there's a lot of local coastal areas that will be underwater. So I went to these places that will be flooded by then, and then I recorded the soundscape ecology using the binaural microphones. And so I went to sort of a few different parts. I think it was about 5 different parts, 5 different areas. And then so that was another part of it. And then I kind of collected waste from these coastlines, the ones that are going to be underwater, and turned them into technofossils. I don't know if you're familiar with the word technofossils, but it's considered to be like scientists are calling, so say, you've got things that are now sort of being washed up on beaches or well, not necessarily on beaches, you're finding it in landfill and all kinds of things, but it's, years old, maybe from the 50s, and it's kind of fossilized into this, well, it's starting to, but it's plastic mixed with kind of like the clay and dirt and so forth. So I created some just from waste from these coastal areas that will be underwater, and created these kind of clay things. And obviously clay's really conductive. And then I sampled some of the sounds from these soundscape, from these areas, from the binaural recordings, and sort of resampled them so they sounded mad. And then did the whole plugging in thing and touching these clay techno fossils to give this idea of a futuristic, you know, because people will only be able to guess at what it sounded like when it's all gone. You won't know that soundscape ecology. And part of it that I recorded was the Adventure Island, because that will be underwater, or it's predicted to be underwater partly. So people won't know ever again, once that's gone, what that sounded like. And then what was the other bit I did? Oh, the other bit was like a composition that sort of featured some of the sounds, but also just normal instrumentation. And so yeah, that in that sense, hopefully the concept was, it was really about the concept more than the you know, the end result, really. Yeah, it wasn't really so much about, oh, this sounds, you know, doesn't this recording of Chalkwell Beach sound amazing? it wasn't really about that. It was more about the idea of it and thinking about it.
You've mentioned a couple of times binaural stuff. It'd probably be an idea to explain to people what that is, really, I guess.
Yeah, so it's mics that are facing in different ways, so you can get like a 360 sound. So when you know, usual stereo is kind of here, left and right, but this is binaural is kind of taking it everywhere. So it's, if you listen to a binaural recording, it's really kind of, it almost sounds like people maybe walking behind you and stuff. It's yeah, it's just really, it's nice sound, I think. Nice result.
If people want to check out more about you, how do they find you in the world, or on the internet, in fact, I suppose?
Website k-a-b.net, and I'm on sort of social media. Instagram I kind of use mainly, I suppose, which is k_a_b_art_n_sound. I mean, you can get to all this on the website anyway, but I've got other social media platforms that I use as well. I'm kind of mainly active on Twitter, Instagram. I tried to get better at Twitter, but mainly Instagram. But it's all on the website. You can kind of find whatever is your social media platform of choice.
Cool. Oh, okay. Yeah, that seems like a good place to say thank you so much, Kelly. That's really fascinating. I honestly think this is the sort of start of something, what you're doing. You know, I think it's really the potential for developing that, particularly as technology itself will develop. It's quite astonishing. So what you're doing is pioneering, I would suggest.
No, I'm not sure that I'm the pioneer, but it's interesting to see how that technology will develop. And I just think it just all fascinates me. We didn't talk about it, but somatics as well, you know, with the way that just fascinates me. And I just feel that the more we become aware through technology of that there is something bigger than us that exists, I think what a better world it will be that we live in.
Absolutely. Perhaps we start looking after it at that point. Yeah. Cool. Okay, I'll keep online after stopping the recording, but for the purposes of the recording, I'd like to say thank you so much, Kelly Anne Buckley.
Thank you so much. It's been a real honor, so thank you.